Silas Crane made a decision that November night that would either save him or destroy everything he'd built. When he saw the woman collapse in his barnyard, soaked and starving, every neighbor would have turned her away. A black widow with nothing to her name, in 1950s Texas, was trouble that could get a white rancher killed. But Silas opened his door anyway. 3 weeks later, he'd do something even crazier. He'd ask her to marry him. Not for love. Not even for companionship. But for a reason that made perfect sense to both of them, and no sense to anyone else. But what Silas didn't know, what neither of them could have guessed, was that opening that door would set in motion events that would end with blood on his hands and a choice that would haunt them both forever. The storm had been building all day, the kind that turns the sky green and makes cattle bunched together nervous and tight. Silas was closing up the barn when he saw her, a dark shape stumbling through sheets of rain so thick he almost missed her entirely. She went down hard 20 feet from his door and didn't get back up. He grabbed a lantern and ran. Up close, she looked half dead already. Black woman, maybe late 20s, clothes plastered to a frame so thin he could probably count her ribs. Her face was turned to the mud, hair spread out like dark seaweed. Silas touched her shoulder. She flinched so violently she nearly knocked the lantern from his hand, scrambling backward on her hands and knees, eyes wild with terror. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, chest heaving, weighing whether to believe him or run back into the storm. Whatever she saw in his face must have convinced her, because she stopped trying to crawl away. "When did you last eat?" Silas asked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried again. 3 days. Maybe 4. "Can you stand?" She tried and her legs gave out. Silas caught her before she hit the ground again, feeling how she trembled in his grip, fever hot through the wet clothes. He lifted her, surprised by how little she weighed, and carried her into the barn. Inside, he set her on a hay bale and wrapped a horse blanket around her shoulders. She pulled it tight, still shaking, still watching him with that wary animal look that said she expected cruelty, because it was all she'd known lately. "I'm going to get food," Silas said. "Don't run. Storm's only getting worse." He headed for the house, moving fast. The kitchen was cold and dark, but he had leftover stew from supper and bread that was only a day old. He grabbed both, plus his wife's old shawl from the peg by the door. Sarah had been dead 3 years, but some of her things remained, small ghosts he couldn't quite bring himself to clear away. When he got back to the barn, the woman hadn't moved. He handed her the bowl, and she took it with shaking hands, eating like someone who'd forgotten how to pace themselves, like the food might disappear if she didn't get it down fast enough. "I'm Silas," he said. "Silas Crane. This is my place." "Delphine." The name came out between mouthfuls. "Delphine Whitmore." "Where were you headed, Delphine?" "Marfa. Got an aunt there." She scraped the bottom of the bowl, then looked at it like she was surprised to find it empty. "Maybe. If she'll have me. That's 20 miles north." "You walked from where?" "Fort Davis." Her eyes dropped. "My husband died 2 months back. Fever took him in 3 days. His family wanted me gone soon as we put him in the ground." Silas had heard stories like this. Black folks in West Texas lived in the margins, holding on to whatever small piece of dignity they could scratch out. When things went wrong, those margins disappeared fast. "Storm's not letting up," he said, looking toward the barn door where rain pounded loud as fists. "You can sleep here tonight. I'll bring more blankets." Delphine's eyes narrowed. "What do you want for it?" "Nothing. Nobody gives something for nothing." "I do." Silas stood, brushing hay from his pants. "But if it makes you feel better, door's got a lock on the inside. Use it." He left before she could argue, feeling her eyes on his back all the way to the house. Silas woke before dawn to silence. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and dripping. He made coffee and fried eggs, then carried breakfast to the barn expecting to find it empty. But Delphine was still there, curled up in the corner with the blankets pulled around her, fast asleep. He set the food down and went about his morning chores, letting her rest. When he came back an hour later, she was awake, sitting on the hay bale with the empty plate beside her. "Thank you," she said. The words came out stiff, like she wasn't used to saying them. "You're welcome." Silas picked up the plate. "Creek's flooded. Won't be safe to cross for at least 2 days." Her face fell. "I can't stay that long." "Why not?" "Because people talk. White man keeping a black woman under his roof, even just in the barn, that's the kind of talk that gets folks killed." She wasn't wrong. Silas knew it, had known it the moment he'd carried her inside. But something in him, the same stubborn streak that had kept him on this failing ranch when smarter men would have sold out, refused to care. "Let them talk," he said. "You need rest and food before you walk 20 miles. I got both." Simple as that. Delphine studied him for a long moment. "You're either the kindest man I ever met or the dumbest." "Probably both," Silas admitted. "Come up to the house. You can clean up proper, and I got work to do that you can help with if you're determined not to take charity." She followed him to the house, still wary, still ready to bolt. The bathroom mirror showed her what she looked like, and Silas heard her sharp intake of breath. He pretended not to notice, busying himself in the kitchen while she washed up. When she emerged, cleaner but still wearing the same ragged dress, he had coffee waiting. She took it, wrapping her hands around the cup like it was precious. "I can work," she said. "For my keep. I won't take advantage. I believe you." Silas gestured to the basket of mending he'd been ignoring for months. "You any good with a needle?" "Better than good." She proved it over the next 2 days. Every shirt she touched came back with stitches so small and neat they were almost invisible. She cleaned the house without being asked, organized the pantry with ruthless efficiency, and cooked meals that made Silas realize how badly he'd been eating. But it was watching her with the horses that changed something in his mind. She had a way with them, gentle and patient, talking low while she worked. The skittish mare that nobody could get near let Delphine touch her, even lift her hooves to check for stones. "You've done this before," Silas said, watching from the barn door. "My grandfather had a farm. I spent summers there as a child." Delphine stroked the mare's neck. "Before he died, and everything went to my uncle who sold it all and drank the money." "You miss it?" "Every day." She looked at him over the horse's back. "Having a place that's yours, where nobody can tell you to leave or that you don't belong. I miss that more than anything." The creek went down on the 3rd day. Silas hitched up the wagon and loaded supplies for the trip to Marfa. Delphine packed her few belongings, moving slow like her body knew something her mind hadn't accepted yet. "Ready?" Silas asked. She looked back at the house, at the barn, at the land stretching away toward the mountains. "Yes," she said, but it sounded like a lie. The ride to Marfa took most of the day. They didn't talk much, just the occasional comment about the weather or the road. But Silas was aware of her beside him on the wagon seat, aware of how she'd started to relax around him over the past few days, the wariness fading into something that might have been trust. Marfa sat in a valley, bigger than Silas expected, with actual streets and stores with painted signs. They found Delphine's aunt living in a narrow house on the south edge of town, washing hanging limp in the yard and chickens pecking at bare dirt. The reunion was cold enough to frost glass. Esther, the aunt, looked Delphine up and down like she was appraising livestock and finding it wanting. "So you came crawling back," Esther said. "I didn't have anywhere else to go." Delphine's voice stayed steady, but Silas heard the hurt underneath. "Your mama always said you'd come to a bad end. Marrying that railroad man, thinking you were better than the rest of us." Esther sniffed. "I suppose you expect to stay here. Just until I find work." "Work?" Esther laughed, sharp and mean. "And who's going to hire you? You got no skills, no references, nothing but the clothes on your back and a dead husband's debts following you around." "I'll find something. You always were prideful. Pride don't fill bellies." Esther's eyes flicked to Silas, then back. "I got one spare room. You can have it, but I expect you to earn your keep. Cleaning, cooking, washing. And when you do find work, you'll pay for your food." Silas wanted to say something, wanted to tell this bitter woman that Delphine deserved better than this grudging charity. But it wasn't his place. Not yet. He helped carry Delphine's bag to the door. Esther disappeared inside, leaving them alone for a moment. "You sure about this?" Silas asked quietly. Delphine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I don't have a choice. Everyone's got choices." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. "This is how to find my ranch. If things don't work out here, if you need anything, you come find me. You understand?" She looked at the paper, then at him, and something cracked in her careful composure. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know you're honest. I know you work hard. I know you deserve better than this." Silas nodded toward the house. Sometimes knowing that is enough. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you, Silas. For everything." He tipped his hat and climbed back into the wagon, feeling her eyes on him until he turned the corner and she disappeared from view. The ranch felt emptier than it had in 3 years when Silas got home. He threw himself into work, fixing things that didn't need fixing, keeping busy from dawn until dark. But every night he lay awake wondering if Delphine was all right, if that aunt of hers was treating her decent, if she'd already thrown away the paper with his address. 3 weeks crawled by. Then one afternoon, Silas looked up from mending fence to see a figure walking up the road toward the ranch. He knew that walk, that determined stride that said the person had made up their mind and wasn't turning back. Delphine looked worse than when he'd left her in Marfa. Thinner, if that was possible, with dark circles under her eyes and a hollow look that made Silas's chest tight with anger at the world that had done this to her. She stopped at the edge of the yard, waiting. Silas set down his tools and walked over, his heart doing something complicated behind his ribs. "Delphine, I know I shouldn't be here." The words came fast, like she'd been practicing them the whole walk. "I know you were just being kind before, and I'm probably presuming too much, but I couldn't stay with Aunt Esther. She made it clear every day that I was a burden. And the only work I could find in town was scrubbing floors for people who wouldn't look at me, who talked about me like I wasn't there. I thought maybe, you said if I needed anything." She stopped, breathing hard. Silas waited, letting her find the rest of her words. "Did you mean it? What you said about coming back if I needed help?" "I meant it," Silas said without hesitation. Relief flooded her face so completely she swayed on her feet. Silas reached out to steady her and found her shaking. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. Aunt Esther said if I wasn't paying for food I didn't deserve it." Rage flared hot in Silas's gut, but he pushed it down. "Come inside. We'll get food in you, then we'll talk." He fed her eggs and ham and bread with butter, watching her eat with the same desperate hunger she'd had that first night. When she finally pushed back from the table, some color had returned to her face. "I can work," Delphine said. "I'm good with animals. I can cook and clean and mend. I'll earn my keep, I promise. I just need somewhere to stay until I figure out what to do next." Silas had been thinking about this for 3 weeks, turning it over in his mind during all those sleepless nights. Now, looking at this woman who'd walked 20 miles on an empty stomach rather than accept degrading charity, he made a decision that would change both their lives. "I got a proposition for you," he said. "But I need you to hear me out before you decide I'm crazy." Delphine frowned. "What kind of proposition?" "This ranch is too much for one person. I've been managing barely, but it's slowly killing me. I need a partner, Delphine. Not just help. Someone who shares the work and shares the decisions and shares everything that comes with this place, good and bad." "I don't understand." Silas took a breath. "I'm saying you should stay permanent. As my wife." The silence that followed was so complete Silas could hear the clock ticking on the wall and his own heart hammering against his ribs. Delphine stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she didn't know. "You're proposing marriage." Her voice came out flat with disbelief. "We barely know each other. I know you're honest. I know you don't quit when things get hard. I know you need a place in this world, and I need someone to help build a life with." Silas leaned forward. "This doesn't have to be about love, Delphine. It can be about partnership. About 2 people making something together that neither of us could make alone." "That's insane," she said, but she didn't get up to leave. "Maybe. But it's also practical." He held her gaze. "You marry me, you get a home, security, ownership of half of everything here. I get a partner who won't quit when things get hard, who knows how to work, who I can trust. We build something together." Delphine stood abruptly, chair scraping wood. She paced to the window, staring out at the ranch. Silas watched her shoulders rise and fall with deep breaths, watched her wrestle with what he was offering. "This is the craziest thing I've ever heard," she said finally. "Probably." She turned to face him. "If I even considered this, and I'm not saying I am, I need to know some things first." "Ask. Do you drink?" "Occasional whiskey. Never to excess." "Do you hit?" "Never have, never will. Any man who raises his hand to a woman isn't a man at all." "What about the other parts of marriage?" Her voice dropped. The intimate parts?" Silas felt heat rise in his face but kept his voice steady. "That's up to you entirely. We can figure things out as we go, or not at all. I'm not looking to force anything. Separate rooms if that's what you want. I'm offering partnership first, Delphine. Everything else is your choice." She crossed her arms, still wary. "And if it doesn't work? If we try this and it's a disaster? Then we figure that out when we come to it. But I'm not going into this planning for failure." Silas stood, moving closer but not crowding her. I need to be straight with you about something else. Folks in town will talk. You being black and me being white, some people will have strong opinions about that. It might get ugly. You think I don't know that? Her voice sharpened with anger. You think I haven't lived my whole life with people's opinions about who I am and where I belong? I know you have. That's why I'm telling you, if we do this, we face it together. Anyone has a problem, they deal with both of us. He paused. But I need to know you're in this for real, Delphine. Not just until something better comes along. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face. I don't love you, she said bluntly. I don't love you either, Silas replied. Not yet anyway. But I respect you, and that's a foundation we can build on. People will say terrible things. They'll call me names. They'll call you worse for marrying me. Let them. Your neighbors will turn on you. You might lose business. Then I'll find new business. This could ruin you. Or it could save us both. Silas held out his hand. I'm not asking for a traditional marriage, Delphine. I'm asking for a partnership between equals. You own half of this place, you make half the decisions, you get half the profits. We build something together that's ours. That's the deal. She stared at his outstretched hand. Her own hand trembled slightly as she raised it. This is absolutely insane, she said. Probably, Silas agreed. I must be out of my mind. That makes two of us. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, calloused, strong. All right. Partners. Partners, Silas echoed, and felt the world shift beneath his feet. They were married 4 days later by a justice of the peace in Fort Stockton, a town far enough away that Delphine's aunt wouldn't hear about it right away. The ceremony took 5 minutes, witnessed by 2 strangers pulled in from the street. Silas bought a simple gold band that was slightly too big, and Delphine wore the dress she'd been wearing when she first collapsed in his barnyard, cleaned and mended until it looked almost respectable. You may kiss your bride, the justice said without enthusiasm, already reaching for the next couple's paperwork. Silas and Delphine looked at each other awkwardly. Then she stepped forward and brushed her lips against his cheek, quick and businesslike. There. Official. They spent their wedding night in separate rooms at a boarding house, neither one sure how to navigate what they'd just done. In the morning, they headed back to the ranch in silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Just 2 people trying to figure out what they'd gotten themselves into. Ground rules, Delphine said as they approached the ranch. We should establish them now before things get complicated. All right. We split the work evenly. I'm not going to be just a housewife while you do all the real ranching. Agreed. I'll teach you everything I know. We make major decisions together. No surprises. Fair. And we're honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Silas nodded. One more rule. We look out for each other. Whatever comes, we face it as a team. Deal. They shook hands again, sealing the partnership. Then Delphine looked at the house, at what was now her home, and something complicated crossed her face. Hope maybe mixed with fear. I'm going to make this work, she said, more to herself than to him. I'm going to prove I deserve this. You already deserve it, Silas said. That's why you're here. The first weeks of their marriage were an awkward dance of 2 people learning to share space. Delphine took over the house completely, cleaning corners Silas had forgotten existed, organizing with ruthless efficiency. But she didn't stop there. She insisted on learning ranch work, following Silas around asking questions, taking mental notes on everything from mending fence to checking cattle for disease. You don't have to do this, Silas said one afternoon, watching her struggle with a stubborn fence post. House and garden would be plenty. You said we were partners. Delphine wiped sweat from her forehead. Partners means I know how to do everything you do. What happens if you get sick or hurt? I need to be able to run this place myself if necessary. She had a point. Silas spent the next month teaching her everything he knew. How to rope and ride, how to read the weather, how to spot a sick cow before symptoms showed, how to handle the horses that were his main source of income. Delphine absorbed it all with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. They ate dinner together every night, conversations growing longer as they learned each other's rhythms. Silas discovered Delphine had a sharp mind for numbers and strategy, often seeing solutions to problems he'd been wrestling with for weeks. She could read and write better than most people he knew, and had opinions about everything from politics to the best way to train a horse. Where'd you learn all this? He asked one evening, watching her work through a complex calculation about feed costs. Books mostly. My mama made sure I could read before she died. After that, I read everything I could get my hands on. She glanced up. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you. 2 months in, they went to town together for the first time as a married couple. Silas could feel Delphine's tension as they drove the wagon down Marfa's main street, saw how she sat straighter, jaw tight, preparing for battle. It came faster than he expected. Bob Hutchins, a rancher Silas had known for years, stepped into their path as they approached the general store. Silas. Hutchins nodded, then his eyes slid to Delphine with open hostility. Heard you got married. Couldn't believe it till I saw it myself. Bob. Silas kept his voice neutral. This is my wife, Delphine Crane. Hutchins didn't offer his hand. That's a mighty interesting choice you made, Silas. Most men around here wouldn't, well, you know. No, I don't know. Why don't you explain it to me? Hutchins's face reddened. Just saying it might complicate things. Business and such. People have opinions about this sort of mixing. Delphine spoke before Silas could. Then those people can keep their opinions to themselves. We're not here for approval. We're here for supplies. Now hold on, Hutchins started, but Delphine cut him off. No, you hold on. My husband asked you a question. You going to answer it straight or keep dancing around what you really want to say? Hutchins looked at Silas. You're going to let her talk to me like that? She's my wife and my partner. She can talk however she wants. Silas took Delphine's elbow. We've got shopping to do. You got business with me, Bob. You know where to find us. They walked past him into the store, leaving Hutchins sputtering behind them. Inside, Delphine's hands were shaking but her head stayed high. That's going to keep happening, she said quietly. I know. Some might do worse than talk. I know that too. Silas turned to face her. You want to leave? Go somewhere else where nobody knows us. She looked at him, surprised. Do you? I asked you first. No, Delphine said firmly. I'm done running from people who think they're better than me. This is our home. Let them choke on it. Silas felt something warm spread through his chest. Good, because I'm done backing down too. But Bob Hutchins wasn't finished with them. 2 weeks later, Silas woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Multiple horses. He grabbed his rifle and went to the window, Delphine right behind him. For men sat on horseback in the pre-dawn darkness. Hutchins was in front. The other 3 wore bandanas over their faces. Silas's blood turned cold. This wasn't a social call. Stay inside, he told Delphine. Absolutely not. She grabbed the second rifle from the rack. We're partners, remember? They stepped onto the porch together. Silas kept his rifle pointed at the ground, but his finger rested near the trigger. The masked men shifted in their saddles, hands on their own weapons. Morning, Bob, Silas said, his voice carrying clear across the yard. Kind of early for a visit. Not a visit, Crane. A warning. Hutchins nodded toward Delphine. Send her back inside. This is between men. My wife stays where she wants to stay. Say what you came to say. One of the masked men spat. You're setting a bad example here, Crane. Got other folks thinking maybe they can do the same. Mix with whoever they want. That ain't how things work. That's exactly how things work, Delphine said, her voice cutting through the morning air. People marry who they choose. You don't like it, that's your problem, not ours. Shut your mouth, girl, the man snapped. Nobody asked you. Silas raised his rifle slightly. You talk to my wife with respect, or you leave. Those are your options. We're trying to help you, Hutchins said, but his voice carried an edge now. Leave. Take her somewhere else. We'll buy your land, fair price. You can start over somewhere people don't know about this. Not interested. Then you're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. Silas took a step forward. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn those horses around and leave my property. And you're not coming back. Ever. Or what? One of the masked men challenged. Or I start shooting, and unlike you cowards, I'm not hiding my face. Everyone will know exactly who defended their home and who trespassed looking to terrorize a woman. The standoff stretched taut. Delphine shifted beside him, and Silas heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. He glanced over and saw her aim was steady, pointed directly at Hutchins. I can hit a jackrabbit at 100 yards, she said conversationally. My grandfather taught me before I was 10. You're considerably bigger than a jackrabbit, Mr. Hutchins. Just so we're clear. Something changed in Hutchins's face. Maybe he saw they were serious. Maybe he realized this wasn't going to be the easy intimidation he'd planned. He raised a hand, stopping the other men from drawing their weapons. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Silas replied. Because if I see you on my land again, I won't talk. I'll shoot first and let the sheriff sort it out after. Now get out." The riders turned and left, disappearing into the growing light. Silas and Delphine stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did Delphine lower her rifle, her hands shaking. "I've never shot a person," she said quietly. "I don't know if I could have." "I know. And I'm glad you didn't have to find out." Silas put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that felt natural despite months of careful distance. "But they don't know that. They're going to think twice before coming back." "What if they don't? Then we deal with it together." She leaned into him slightly, just for a moment. "I'm scared, Silas." "Me too." But fear wasn't the only thing growing between them. Something else had taken root during those months of working side by side, eating dinner together, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Silas found himself noticing things he'd tried not to notice before. The way Delphine laughed with her whole body. The way she hummed while she worked. The curve of her neck when she leaned over the kitchen table, writing in the account books she'd started keeping. He'd catch himself staring and force his eyes away, reminding himself this was a business arrangement. Partners. Nothing more. But his body didn't seem to care about the rules. Neither did his heart. Delphine felt it too. The way her breath caught when Silas passed too close. The way she'd started noticing the strength in his hands. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The way his rare smiles transformed his usually serious face into something that made her stomach flip. She told herself it meant nothing. They were partners, friends at most. That was all this was supposed to be. But at night, lying in her room knowing he was just on the other side of the wall, she couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like to cross that distance. To let this partnership become something more. The breaking point came on a scorching July afternoon. They'd been working since dawn, moving cattle to better pasture, and the heat was brutal. Silas had stripped off his shirt hours ago, sweat making his skin gleam in the harsh sunlight. Delphine tried not to stare, tried to focus on the work, but it was getting harder to pretend. When they finally finished, Silas headed for the creek that ran through the back of their property. Delphine followed, desperate to cool off. She knelt at the water's edge, splashing her face and neck, feeling the blessed relief of cold water on overheated skin. When she looked up, Silas was watching her. Not with the careful distance he'd maintained for months, but with raw hunger that took her breath away. "Silas," she said, and her voice came out rough. "I'm trying," he said. "I'm trying to respect the boundaries we set. Trying to be the partner you agreed to. But Delphine, I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting more than what we said this would be." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen. And I know that's not what you signed up for. I know this was supposed to be practical, but I can't help it." He moved closer, water soaking into his boots. "Tell me to stop. Tell me I'm alone in this, and I'll never mention it again." Delphine stood on shaking legs. 6 months of denial, of telling herself this was just partnership, just survival, crumbled in an instant. "You're not alone," she whispered. The kiss was inevitable, something they'd been moving toward since that first night in the storm. It started gentle, tentative, then deepened into something desperate. Months of wanting, of denying, of carefully maintained distance burned away in the summer heat. They stumbled back to the house, kissing between steps, hands exploring with urgent need. The bedroom they'd been carefully avoiding for 6 months finally stopped being forbidden territory. What happened there was awkward and perfect, tender and fierce. 2 people who denied themselves too long finally letting go. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, breathing hard. "So," Delphine said against his chest. "I guess we're really married now." Silas laughed, the sound rumbling through both of them. "Guess so." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you," she said, testing the words. "I don't know when it happened exactly, but I do. I love you too." He traced her cheekbone with his thumb. "Best business decision I ever made, proposing to a woman I barely knew. Worst financial planning, though. You didn't even negotiate terms. Got everything I wanted anyway." She kissed him again, slower this time, taking her time. When they finally emerged from the bedroom hours later, the world felt different. They weren't just partners anymore. They were truly husband and wife in every sense, and the difference was written in every touch, every glance, every shared smile. But happiness made them careless. They let their guard down, forgot that there were people watching who didn't want them to succeed. The fire started just after midnight 3 weeks later. Silas woke to the smell of smoke and Delphine shaking him hard. "The barn," she gasped. "Silas, the barn's on fire." They ran outside in their nightclothes to find flames already consuming one side of the structure. The horses were screaming, trapped inside. Silas grabbed buckets, started a water chain with Delphine, but it was clear they couldn't stop it. "The horses," Delphine shouted over the roar of flames. "We have to get them out." She ran toward the barn before Silas could stop her. He followed, terror making his movements clumsy. Inside was an inferno, smoke so thick it was like being blind. He found Delphine by the stalls, throwing them open, slapping horses to get them moving toward the door. One refused to go, panicked and rearing. Silas grabbed Delphine and pushed her toward safety. "Get out. I'll get him. I'm not leaving you. That's an order, not a request. Go." She went, coughing hard. Silas turned back to the terrified horse, talking low despite the fear clawing at his throat. The heat was unbearable now, the smoke suffocating. He got a rope on the horse and pulled, dragged him toward where the door should be. Then something above gave way with a crack like a gunshot. Silas looked up in time to see the burning beam falling. He threw himself sideways, felt it graze his shoulder, heard Delphine scream his name. He made it out seconds before the entire roof collapsed. Fell to his knees in the dirt, coughing so hard his ribs ached. Delphine was on him immediately, checking him over with frantic hands, crying and cursing in equal measure. "You could have died," she sobbed. "You stupid, stupid man, you could have died. But I didn't." He pulled her close, both of them shaking. "The horses. All out. They're safe." They watched their barn burn to the ground, flames reaching into the night sky like accusing fingers. By the time the sun came up, there was nothing left but smoking timbers and ash. Silas walked the perimeter once the embers cooled enough, looking for the cause. He found it near the back corner. A kerosene can that hadn't been there the night before, and boot prints in the soft earth that were too deliberate to be accidental. "It was them," Delphine said, staring at the evidence. "Hutchins and his friends. They tried to burn us out. Looks that way." Silas's voice was flat, cold with a fury he'd never felt before. "We should tell the sheriff." "And say what? We found a can?" "Sheriff's been looking the other way for months. You think he'll suddenly care now?" Delphine wrapped her arms around herself. "So what do? We rebuild." Silas turned to face her. "And we make sure they know we're not scared." But he was scared. Not of Hutchins or fire or violence. He was scared of what he might become if pushed hard enough. He'd killed men during the war, watched them fall, seen what a bullet could do to flesh. He'd thought those days were behind him, that he'd put that part of himself away. Now he felt it stirring again, that cold readiness to do whatever was necessary to protect what was his. They spent the next 2 weeks clearing debris and planning the new barn. Tom Winters, a neighbor from 10 miles east, came by to offer help. He was younger than Silas, maybe 30, with a friendly face and no apparent prejudice. "Heard about your fire," Tom said, climbing down from his wagon. "Came to see if you needed a hand with the rebuilding." Silas studied him warily. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Tom glanced at Delphine, who stood on the porch with her rifle within reach. "And because Bob Hutchins is a bully who thinks his money gives him the right to terrorize folks. Figure anyone he's got a problem with is probably decent." It was the start of an unlikely friendship. Tom proved to be a skilled carpenter and a hard worker. More importantly, his presence seemed to keep the worst of the harassment at bay. Word got around that the Cranes weren't completely isolated, that they had at least one ally. But Hutchins wasn't done. He couldn't attack directly now, not with witnesses around, so he found subtler ways to cause damage. Silas's credit at the feed store was suddenly revoked. Buyers who'd been reliable for his horses mysteriously dried up. Fences got cut in the night, letting cattle wander onto the road. "He's trying to bleed us out," Delphine said one evening, going over the books. "Make it so expensive to operate that we can't afford to stay." "Is it working?" Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. "We've got maybe 3 months before we're in serious trouble." She set down her pencil. "We need a different income stream. Something Hutchins can't interfere with." That's when Delphine had the idea that would change everything. "What if we started taking in horses?" she said. "Not just training them, but rehabilitating ones other people have given up on. I'm good with difficult animals, you know that. We could charge premium prices for turning problem horses into reliable mounts." Silas considered it. Word-of-mouth business. Harder for Hutchins to poison. Exactly. And we only need a few high-profile successes to build a reputation. They started small. Tom Winters mentioned their services to a wealthy rancher up north who had a stallion nobody could handle. The horse had thrown 3 trainers and was headed for auction as unrideable. Delphine asked for 2 months and a chance. Silas watched her work with that stallion, patient and fearless, talking low while the horse raged and fought. She never hit him, never lost her temper, just waited him out day after day until curiosity overcame fury. 6 weeks later, she was riding him. 8 weeks in, he was responding to voice commands like he'd been born to it. When his owner came to collect him, he couldn't believe the transformation. "How much do I owe you?" the rancher asked, checkbook already out. 300, Delphine said without hesitation. The man didn't blink. "Worth every penny. I'll be telling everyone I know about this." He was good as his word. Within a month, they had 4 more problem horses on the property and a waiting list developing. The money started coming in steady, enough to offset what Hutchins was costing them. But success made enemies more dangerous than failure ever had. Silas was in town one afternoon, picking up supplies, when he overheard a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. 2 of Hutchins's men were standing outside the saloon, talking low. "Boss says it needs to look like an accident," one said. "Nobody can prove anything." "When?" "Soon. He's losing patience. That woman makes him look weak, standing up to him like she does." Silas felt ice slide down his spine. He finished his shopping and headed home fast, his mind racing. When he got there, he found Delphine in the corral with one of the rehabilitation horses, completely unaware of the dangers circling closer. "We need to talk," he said. "Inside. Now." He told her what he'd heard. Watched the color drain from her face. "An accident," she repeated. "What kind of accident?" "I don't know. But we need to be ready." Silas went to the gun cabinet and started checking weapons, loading them, setting them in strategic places around the property. "From now on, one of us carries at all times. We don't go anywhere alone. And at night, we take turns keeping watch." "This is insane." Delphine's voice shook. "How did we get here? We're just trying to live our lives. We're living our lives in a way that threatens their idea of how the world should work." Silas pulled her close. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep." But he'd already made that promise to himself the day he married her. Whatever it took to keep her safe, he'd do it. Even if it meant becoming the kind of man he'd hoped never to be again. The attack came 2 nights later. Silas was on watch, sitting in the kitchen with a clear view of the yard, when he saw movement in the darkness. Not one figure. 3. Moving with purpose toward the house. He woke Delphine silently, pointed. She grabbed her rifle without a word. They positioned themselves at windows on opposite sides of the house, covering all approaches. The men crept closer. Silas could see they carried cans, could smell kerosene even through the closed windows. They were going to try to burn them out again. But this time, the house. This time, with them inside. "Now," one of them hissed. Silas fired first, deliberately high, a warning shot that kicked up dirt inches from the nearest man's feet. "Next one goes through your chest," he shouted. "Drop the cans and leave." Instead, they scattered. One threw his can toward the house, kerosene splashing across the porch. Another pulled a gun and fired wild. The bullet punched through the window, showering Silas with glass. Delphine's rifle cracked once, twice. Silas heard a scream, and one of the men went down, clutching his leg. "I'm hit," the man wailed. "She shot me." "Good," Delphine called back, her voice steady despite the fear Silas knew she must be feeling. "Next one goes higher. Leave now or find out where." The other 2 grabbed their wounded companion and ran, stumbling in their panic. Silas watched them disappear into the darkness, then turned to Delphine. She was shaking, the rifle wavering in her hands. "I shot him," she said. "I actually shot someone. You defended our home. That's not the same thing. Isn't it?" She set the rifle down carefully, like it might bite. "What have we become, Silas? We're living like we're at war. Because we are at war." He moved to the window, checking the yard for more threats. "Hutchins started this. But I'm going to finish it." "What does that mean?" Silas looked at her, and something in his eyes made her take a step back. "It means I'm done being defensive. It means tomorrow, I'm riding into town and having a conversation with Bob Hutchins. A final conversation. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about survival." "No." Delphine grabbed his arm. "No, that's not who we are. That's not who you are. You don't know what I am," Silas said, and his voice was cold enough to hurt. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me. He turned away, staring out at the darkness. During the war, I wasn't regular army. I was a scout. Went behind enemy lines, gathered intelligence, eliminated targets when necessary. The words came out flat, emotionless. I was good at it. Too good. Killed 17 men in ways that made sure nobody found the bodies until I was long gone. Delphine was silent. Silas couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see disgust or fear replace the love he'd seen in her eyes. I thought I left that behind, he continued. Built this ranch, tried to be a different person. But it's still there, Delphine. That part of me that knows how to kill efficiently, quietly, permanently. And right now, that's all I can think about. Going to town and making sure Bob Hutchins never threatens us again. And then what? Delphine's voice was quiet. You kill him and run? Hang for murder? Leave me here alone. I'd make it look like an accident. You'd still know. I'd still know. She moved in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. You said we face things together. So we face this together, but not like that. Not by becoming what they think we are. Then how? How do we stop him? We beat him the right way. We survive, we prosper, we prove that we belong here and there's nothing he can do about it. She cupped his face in her hands. I won't let you become a killer again, Silas. Not for me. Not for anyone. He closed his eyes, feeling the temptation war with love. He's not going to stop. Next time, he might succeed. Then we make sure there's no next time. We go to the marshal in Fort Stockton, the one who has jurisdiction over Hutchins. We present evidence. We make enough noise that he can't be ignored. It wasn't as satisfying as violence, but it was smarter. Silas knew that. He also knew Delphine was right. If he killed Hutchins, even in a way that looked accidental, it would change him. Would change them. Would poison everything they'd built. All right, he said finally. We do it your way. The next morning, they rode to Fort Stockton with Tom Winters beside them as a witness. The marshal there was an older man named Carson, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Silas laid it all out. The fire, the threats, the attempted arson 2 nights ago. Delphine showed him the account books, proving the systematic economic harassment. Tom testified to the conversations he'd overheard, the open hostility from Hutchins and his associates. Marshal Carson listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied them. You know what you're asking me to do, he said. Bob Hutchins has money connections. Going after him means going after everyone he's bought. We know, Delphine said. But we're asking anyway. Why? Why not just leave? Sell the ranch, start somewhere else. Because running teaches them they can do this to the next person who doesn't fit their idea of acceptable. Her voice was fierce. Because we have a right to exist where we choose. Because if we don't stand up now, we'll spend the rest of our lives running. Carson nodded slowly. I had a daughter, he said. Married a Mexican boy against my wishes. I was young and stupid and full of opinions about what was proper. Spent 5 years not speaking to her. He paused. She died of influenza before I could apologize. Before I could tell her I was wrong. He stood, reaching for his hat. I'll look into this. Can't promise results, but I can promise I'll try. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had. They rode home feeling something that might have been hope. 3 days later, Marshal Carson arrived at their ranch with 2 deputies. Need to see that wounded man's blood trail, he said. And I need formal statements from both of you. They showed him everything. The boot prints from the first fire. The kerosene can. The bullet holes in the window. Most tellingly, the blood trail leading away from the house that Carson's deputies followed back toward Hutchins's property. This is good, Carson said. Real good. But I need one more thing. I need you to not do anything stupid while I build this case. No matter what Hutchins tries, you stay defensive. No retaliation. Can you do that? Silas looked at Delphine. She nodded. We can do that, he said. But staying defensive while Hutchins ramped up his attacks was harder than either of them imagined. He sent men to their property line to shout threats. Had his hands spread rumors that Delphine was Silas's slave, not his wife, that he'd bought her for immoral purposes. The stories got uglier, more vicious, designed to turn even sympathetic neighbors against them. I can't go to town anymore, Delphine said one evening, her voice brittle with held-back tears. The things people say, the way they look at me, it's like I'm not human to them. Then I'll go to town. You stay here. That's not a solution. That's hiding. It's survival until Carson can do his job. But Carson was running into walls. Every witness he tried to interview suddenly developed amnesia. The man Delphine had shot disappeared, probably paid off or threatened into silence. Evidence had a way of vanishing. Hutchins's money and influence ran deeper than anyone had realized. "I'm not giving up," Carson told them during one of his visits. "But this is going slower than I hoped." "How much slower?" Silas asked. "Weeks. Maybe months." They didn't have months. The harassment was costing them business, costing them money, wearing them down bit by bit. Silas could see it in Delphine's eyes, the way her smile came less frequently, how she jumped at every unexpected sound. "We need to do something," she said one night, lying in bed beside him. "I can't keep living like this. Like we're prisoners in our own home. What do you suggest?" She was quiet for a long moment. "What if we brought the fight to them? Not with violence. With visibility. Make ourselves so public that they can't touch us without everyone seeing." "I'm listening. There's a horse auction in Marfa next month. Big one. People come from all over Texas." She turned to face him. "What if we entered some of our rehabilitated horses? Showed everyone what we can do? That's walking straight into the lion's den." "Maybe. Or maybe it's showing we're not afraid. That we belong in this community, whether they like it or not." It was risky. It was potentially disastrous. It was exactly what they needed to do. They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Selected their 3 best success stories, horses that had been written off as untrainable and were now responsive and steady. Practiced demonstrations, planned their presentation. Tom Winters agreed to come with them, providing another friendly face. The day of the auction, Silas woke with his stomach in knots. Delphine was already up, dressed in her best clothes, braiding her hair with steady hands despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "Ready?" she asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." The auction grounds were packed. Hundreds of people, most of whom stared at Silas and Delphine with open hostility or morbid curiosity. Silas saw Hutchins near the front, surrounded by his usual group of sycophants and hired muscle. The rancher's face darkened when he spotted them, but he didn't approach. Their turn came in the afternoon. Silas led out the first horse, a bay stallion that had been notoriously vicious when they'd taken him in. Delphine walked beside the horse, her hand resting lightly on his neck, no lead rope, no restraints. The crowd fell silent. "This is Thunder," Delphine announced, her voice carrying clear across the grounds. 6 months ago, he'd thrown 3 trainers and put 2 men in the hospital. His owner was ready to shoot him. She stepped away from the horse. "Thunder, circle." The stallion moved away from her, trotting in a perfect circle around the arena. At her whistle, he came back, nudging her shoulder gently. "Thunder isn't vicious," Delphine continued. "He was scared. He'd been beaten, mistreated, taught that humans meant pain. We taught him different." She ran her hand down his neck. "We taught him trust." She demonstrated a dozen commands, each one executed flawlessly. The crowd watched in stunned silence. When she finished, there was a moment of nothing. Then someone started clapping. Someone else joined in. Within seconds, half the crowd was applauding. Hutchins's face was purple with rage. They repeated the performance with the other 2 horses, each demonstration more impressive than the last. By the time they finished, people were lining up to ask about their services, to inquire about bringing their own problem horses. "That was incredible," one rancher said, shaking Silas's hand. "How long have you been doing this?" "About 6 months, sir." "And you learned where?" "Taught myself," Delphine said, stepping up beside Silas. "With patience and the belief that most horses aren't bad, just misunderstood." The rancher looked at her properly for the first time, really seeing her. "You did this?" "All of it. My wife is the best horse trainer in West Texas," Silas said firmly. "I'm just the assistant." Something shifted in the man's expression. Not acceptance exactly, but a crack in the prejudice. "Well, that's remarkable. Truly." They booked 5 new contracts that day. Would have had more if Hutchins hadn't been working the crowd, spreading poison, trying to undo what they'd accomplished. But even his influence couldn't completely negate what people had seen with their own eyes. As they loaded up to leave, Tom pulled Silas aside. "Hutchins is fit to be tied," he said quietly. "I'd watch your back extra careful the next few days." "I will." But Hutchins didn't attack. Not directly. Instead, 3 days later, Marshal Carson showed up at their ranch with news that changed everything. "Found your witness," Carson said without preamble. "The man your wife shot." He's willing to testify, but he wants protection and immunity. What's he saying? Delphine asked. Everything. Names, dates, who ordered what. Turns out Hutchins hasn't just been harassing you. He's been running a protection racket, intimidating anyone who doesn't fall in line with his vision of how things should be. Carson smiled grimly. Your case opened a door. Now others are coming forward. So what happens now? Silas felt hope and fear warring in his chest. Now I arrest Bob Hutchins and about 6 of his associates. I'm going to need you 2 to testify at trial, but between your statements and the others, we've got him solid. The arrest happened 2 days later. Silas and Delphine weren't there to see it, but word spread fast. Bob Hutchins, one of the most powerful men in the county, taken away in chains, facing charges of arson, attempted murder, extortion, and a dozen other crimes. His trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, something remarkable happened. With Hutchins gone, other voices started speaking up. People who'd been silently sympathetic, but afraid to show it came forward. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough to make a difference. A merchant in Marfa started greeting Delphine by name. A neighbor they'd never met stopped by to buy eggs. Small things, but they added up to something that felt almost like acceptance. It's not going to fix everything, Delphine said one evening, watching the sunset from their porch. There will always be people who hate us for existing outside their rules. I know, Silas replied. But maybe it's enough that some people are willing to look past it, to judge us by our character instead of our skin. She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. They'd survived fire and threats and violence. They'd faced down hatred and fear. And somehow, impossibly, they'd won. 3 months later, they stood in a courthouse and watched Bob Hutchins get sentenced to 15 years in prison. His associates got lesser sentences, but enough to break up his organization. As they left the courthouse, Silas felt a weight lift that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. It's over, Delphine said, squeezing his hand. Not over. Just beginning. Silas pulled her close, right there on the courthouse steps with everyone watching. We've got a life to build, partner. She smiled up at him, that fierce, bright smile that had first made him realize he was falling in love. Then let's build it. They went home to their ranch, to the new barn they'd rebuilt stronger than before, to the corrals full of horses learning to trust again, to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. That night, lying in bed with Delphine asleep in his arms, Silas thought about the journey that had brought them here. A storm, a desperate woman, a crazy proposal, everything that had come after. 2 years passed. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest expectations. Delphine's reputation as a horse trainer spread across Texas and into neighboring states. They had more business than they could handle, had to start turning people away. They bought adjoining land, expanded their operation, hired 2 hands to help with the work. Tom Winters and his wife became regular visitors, bringing their children to play. Other neighbors followed slowly, cautiously accepting that the Cranes weren't going anywhere. Weren't a threat. Were just people trying to live their lives. Then one morning, Delphine woke up sick. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. Silas watched her with growing concern until she finally went to see the doctor in Fort Stockton. She came back with her hand pressed to her stomach and tears in her eyes. What is it? Silas's heart clenched with fear. What did he say? I'm pregnant. Her voice broke. Silas, we're going to have a baby. He pulled her into his arms, feeling his own eyes sting. They'd talked about children, hoped for them, but hadn't quite dared to believe it would happen. Now it was real. When? He managed. 6 months, maybe 7. The doctor said everything looks good, but... She pulled back to look at him. I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? What if our child has to face what we've faced? Then we'll teach them to be strong. Like their mother. Silas cupped her face in his hands. We'll teach them that being different isn't wrong. That love matters more than rules. That family isn't about blood or color. It's about choice and commitment and standing together no matter what. The baby arrived on a cold February morning after a labor that terrified Silas more than any violence he'd ever faced. But when the doctor finally placed their daughter in his arms, tiny and perfect and crying with outraged vigor, he felt something break open in his chest that had been locked away for years. She's beautiful, he whispered. She is, Delphine agreed, exhausted but glowing. What should we name her? They'd discussed names for months, unable to agree. But now, looking at his daughter's small brown face, Silas knew exactly what her name should be. Hope, he said. We'll call her Hope, because that's what she is. Proof that something good can grow from the hardest soil. That love wins in the end. Delphine smiled. Hope Crane. I like it. They brought Hope home to the ranch 2 days later. Tom and his wife came by with gifts. Other neighbors followed, some bringing blankets and clothes, others just coming to see and offer congratulations. The acceptance wasn't universal, would probably never be universal, but it was real and growing. Years passed. Hope grew into a wild, fearless child who loved the horses and followed her parents everywhere. She learned to ride before she could read, learned to train difficult horses by watching her mother, learned integrity and hard work from her father. When she was 5, Silas and Delphine sat her down and told her the truth about their marriage. How it had started as a business arrangement. How it had grown into love. How they'd fought for the right to be together, to build this life. Were you scared? Hope asked. Terrified, Delphine admitted. Every single day. But you did it anyway. Because some things are worth being scared for, Silas said. Your mama, this ranch, you. All worth it. Hope considered this. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. You already are, Delphine said, pulling her daughter close. You just don't know it yet. More children followed. 2 boys, strong and loud and constantly in motion. The house filled with noise and laughter and life. The ranch continued to prosper. Silas and Delphine became known throughout Texas, not as the interracial couple who defied convention, but simply as the Cranes, the best horse trainers money could buy. But they never forgot how close they'd come to losing everything. Never forgot the people who'd stood with them and the ones who'd tried to tear them down. Those memories became stories they told their children, lessons about courage and standing up for what's right even when the world says you're wrong. On their 20th anniversary, Silas took Delphine back to the place where she'd first stumbled onto his property during that storm. He'd built a bench there years ago, under a cottonwood tree that gave good shade. 20 years, Delphine said, settling onto the bench beside him. Can you believe it? Some days, yes. Some days it feels like yesterday you were eating stew in my barn, looking at me like I might murder you in your sleep. She laughed. You were very suspicious. This strange man being nice for no reason. I had reasons. Just didn't know them all yet. Silas took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. You changed my life, Delphine. Saved it, really. I was just existing before you. After, I finally started living. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what partners do. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Hope was teaching her brothers to rope fence posts, patient despite their wild enthusiasm. The house stood solid against the horizon, smoke rising from its chimney. Cattle grazed in pastures they'd worked together to maintain. Horses ran in corrals they'd built with their own hands. Everything they saw was theirs, built from nothing but determination and love, and refusing to quit when the world tried to break them. Do you ever regret it? Delphine asked quietly. Everything we went through. The threats, the fire, almost losing everything. Was it worth it? Silas turned to her, seeing the woman she'd become. Confident, capable, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with character. She was his partner, his love, the mother of his children, the person who'd helped him build a life worth fighting for. Not for 1 second, he said. You. She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly like she'd been made for that exact space. Not for 1 second. The sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red as it sank toward the mountains. Their children's laughter carried on the wind. Inside the house, dinner was waiting, the table large enough for their whole family. Later, there would be bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, and the easy intimacy of 2 people who'd chosen each other every day for 20 years. But for now, they just sat together, 2 people who'd found each other in a storm and decided to build something that would last forever. Who'd faced hatred and violence and fear, and come through stronger. Who'd proved that love, real love built on partnership and respect and choice, could survive anything. The storm that had brought them together was long past. But what it had created, what they had created together, would echo through generations. Their children would grow up knowing that courage meant standing up for what's right even when the world says you're wrong. That love means choosing someone every day, not just once. That family is what you build, not what you're born into. And maybe, just maybe, they'd make the world a little bit better for the next person who dared to love outside the lines. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love and courage can triumph over hate, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week, Tales of real people who refused to let the world tell them who they could be or who they could love. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Silas and Delphine's journey, and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Your support helps us keep bringing these important stories to life. Until next time, remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your door to someone the world has turned away. Because you never know, that stranger might just become your greatest blessing.